They didn't put me in handcuffs. I appreciated that, but it left me confused. If the federal agents who barged into my apartment knew who I was, what I had done, you'd think they would have proceeded with more caution. I waited in the interrogation room for almost an hour. When the door finally opened and 2 people entered, I made sure to smile politely. It seemed the proper thing to do. "Hi there, if it isn't Reagan's infamous G-Man," I said, then corrected myself. Well, G-Man and G-Lady. "I'm Special Agent Jensen," said the female agent. "This is my senior partner, Special Agent Walsh." I gave them a little wave from across the table. "I'm Sarah. I'm not special anything." I looked over each of them as they took their seats. The man was about 40. He had a crew cut. He was big and pale with beady eyes and a swollen neck that bulged at the collar. The woman was younger, thinner, sorta pretty in a stuck-up bitch kind of way. Fantastic perm. "What can I do for you tonight?" I asked. Agent Walsh held up 2 manila envelopes, opened the first, and began to lay photographs on the table. 2 rows of full pictures, all in glossy color. I leaned forward and looked at the photos. "Pretty," I said. "They're bodies, sweetheart," growled Walsh. "The 8 men you killed." "The 8 that you know about." I cleared my throat. "Just to be clear." Special Agent Jensen sat back in her chair, arms crossed, watching me. "You are a strange woman, Sarah. By day, a mild-mannered lab technician over at DC Medical. But when the sun goes down, the fishnet stockings, feather boa, the wigs, you walk the back streets in 4-inch heels and what? Do the men just invite you into their cars? Is that how it works?" I shrugged. "Pretty much." Walsh scoffed. "You're a real freak." He leaned forward, his gut squishing against the table. "Jill the Ripper." I sighed. "I don't love that name, don't get me wrong. It's pretty gnarly. The papers certainly could have chosen something worse. It's just, Jack the Ripper killed prostitutes. That was his whole thing. They're the most common victims of serial killers, actually. But me, I killed the Johns. See? It's the opposite." Walsh's lip curled. "What would you prefer to be called? The Horror's Avenger?" I started to roll my eyes, then paused. "Huh, that's surprisingly not terrible." Jensen uncrossed her arms. "What do you call yourself?" There was a glimmer in the agent's dark eyes, genuine curiosity and excitement? Maybe. She was more interesting than I first guessed. I met her gaze. "The Good Night Killer." She nodded. "Because you tucked them in afterward." I smiled. She got it. She understood. Her partner probably looked at those photographs and saw only the carnage. The deep gashes at the exposed thighs, the long cut from ear to ear, opening the throat, spilling enough blood to soak the clothes, the car seat, the seatbelt, all of it. Special Agent Jensen had taken the time to see the meaning in the details. She had noticed that I always removed the jacket and draped it over the torso, tucking it beneath the severed neck and over the shoulders. It's the least I can do, really. For once it's done, once they've bled out and gone still, they cease to be monsters. Then they're just bodies. "How do you manage it?" Jensen asked. "You're what, 4'10", 95 pounds? Most of these victims are big guys." I chuckled. "It doesn't matter how big they are or strong or tough. Once you get a man's pants around his ankles and his seat leaned back and all the blood rushes to his nether regions, you can do whatever you want. They become these big, dumb sheep. It's almost too easy to be fun. Almost." I swiveled my eyes to Walsh. He looked at his partner. "Can you believe this one, sweetheart?" "Hey!" I yelled, slapping the table. "What the hell was that? Sweetheart? When you call me sweetheart, I get it. I don't love it, but I get it. But she is your partner, dude. Your junior partner, sure. And no doubt she can't wait for your ass to retire or get killed on the job, but still, show a little respect. What do you know about respect? Asked Walsh. Bite me, I said. Look around you. All of us at this table. We're all killers, and you know it. We're not that different. I locked eyes with Jensen. You and I. Walsh snorted a derisive laugh. There are killers, and there are killers. I crossed my eyes and made my voice cartoonishly low. And there are killers. Come on, really? There are a whole lot of ways to make a living in this world. You guys chose the one that comes with violence and secrets and a license to kill. Maybe you tell yourself you hope you never have to use your weapon, but I bet that every day, on every case, part of you itches for the shit to go down, for the danger to be real, to give you a reason to let you do it. I stared at Jensen. Her eyes were wide. She swallowed. Then the tip of her tongue moved instinctively across her chapped upper lip and dipped back into her mouth. Her lips parted. I could hear the soft, wet sound of the lips disconnecting. She inhaled and held it. And you, I turned back to Walsh. You're the biggest hypocrite of all. The haircut, the demeanor, the whole thing. Ex-military. I'm gonna say Marines? You're a tad young for Korea. Vietnam then. Yeah, multiple tours probably. You volunteered to go back because you missed it, didn't you? He sneered and puffed out his chest. That's what I thought, I said. What was your method? Machine gun from a helicopter? Grenades tossed into tunnels? Or a flamethrower from 20 yards away? I clicked my tongue. Where is the respect in that? Me? I get in close. I make it personal. I make it honest. I leaned back and sighed. Or I did, until now. I held out my hands to either side. You got me. Jensen squinted. There was a strange expression on her face, hard to read. She began picking up and stacking the photographs of my victims, then slid them back into their folder. Here's what happens now, Sarah, she told me, setting the second folder on the table. When we're done talking, you are going to stand up, walk out the back door of this building, and never see either of us again. I lowered my arms and cocked my head. Say what now? We're letting you go, Sarah. Just like that. She nodded. What's the catch? Oh, there's a catch, all right, grumbled Walsh. Jensen tapped the folder. You see, Sarah, stopping people like you is not what our department does. We go after bigger fish. Much, much bigger fish. And here I was thinking I'm a whale, I said, pouting sarcastically as she opened the second folder. She slid a photograph across the table to me. It showed a man in his 50s, balding, thick glasses, square chin, wearing a beige suit. He was crouching to get into the back seat of a shiny new '85 Bentley Mulsanne. Who is he? I asked. Arkady Morozova. He's a Soviet national and a nuclear physicist, staying at 1773 Church Street. You want to talk about killers, Sarah? This man is working on a weapon that can fit into a suitcase and obliterate an entire city. Geez, I said, frowning. Talk about impersonal. We need to get you into Morozova's car and kill him. I slid the photograph back to her. Why me? Walsh snorted a laugh. Because everyone knows this Arkady guy loves to pick up whores. Jensen shook her head. That's not what she was asking. She closed her eyes and released a long, slow breath, then leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands together, fingers steepled as if in prayer. She opened her eyes and looked at me. Society is always one breath away from total collapse. Most people don't know that. Most people would go crazy if they knew. And it's not people like you, Sarah, that threatened the collapse. There have always been people like you. There's a certain amount of breakage built into the system to handle that. No, it's men like Arkady Morozova that throw the scales out of balance. And the scales, they must be balanced. I nodded. Pretty words. Still doesn't explain why you need a serial killer to do the job. We have a lot of targets to deal with, said Jensen. There are only so many public assassinations we can pull off, and conveniently timed heart attacks and tumbles on icy staircases start to look suspicious after a while. You might be surprised to learn that being an effective FBI agent requires a certain amount of creative thinking. Okay, but wouldn't it be easier to have one of your agents just copy my methods and do it that way? We could do that, said Walsh, sneering. But if they get caught, and it leads back to us, that would look very bad. If you get caught, well, then you're just some psycho bitch with a crazy story. Morozova leaves his house at 5 a.m. every morning to go swimming at the YMCA on K Street, Jensen told me. Then he comes back and goes out again about 12:30 for a series of meetings around the city. In the evenings, he sometimes drives to 14th Street in search of companionship. I shook my head. Hang on, am I supposed to honestly believe that after I do this, you're just gonna let me walk away? Jensen leaned forward on her elbows, her steepled fingers dropping to intertwine. You are not my problem, Sarah. Bigger fish, remember? But if I was able to track you down, I imagine the DC police aren't far behind. I can handle the cops, so you'll do it. I looked from Jensen to Walsh, then back again. I shrugged. Sure. Jensen slid her hands into her lap, looking relieved. Walsh barked a laugh and jabbed his partner in the shoulder. Now we see if your crazy plan plays off, huh, sweetheart? I watched her face as he said that to her, the subtle twitch of one cheek muscle, the tightening of the jaw, the hardness in her eyes, all that tightly wound anger and resentment. Interesting. I scooted my chair back from the table and stood. I half expected them to lunge and grab me, to put me in cuffs after all, and tell me it was all a joke. But they didn't. I started walking toward the door, but as I passed the table, Jensen reached out a hand and grabbed my wrist. I felt her fingers, cold, skin on skin. She pulled me gently down and whispered in my ear. Spokojno noche. I looked at her, not understanding. It's Russian, she said softly. It means good night. I left the room. They had me followed, because of course they did. Despite the late hour and the cold autumn weather, a man in a tweed cap and running shoes was walking his dog. He happened to follow my route away from the building, and he happened to turn left when I did. I surveyed the street ahead and planned a quick escape. Figuring the man on my tail wouldn't be able to follow me, I moved suddenly sideways through the bars of a schoolyard fence. It was a tight squeeze, even for me, and it would take him time to climb the fence to follow. Hurrying around the side of the school, I gambled on him running to the next block instead, trying to catch up with me on the other side. It worked. I heard his rapid footsteps in the alley and the dog barking. I spun around and returned to the fence, squeezed through, and made my way quietly back to the building where the interrogation had taken place. It was a derelict office park with boarded windows, and there were only 3 cars parked on the street outside. 2 Ford Limiteds and a Dodge Monaco. I spent a few seconds calculating who I believed each car belonged to, made my choice, and approached the Monaco, pulling out 2 bobby pins from my hair as I crouched behind the trunk. I'm good at picking locks. I'm good at a lot of things, but I obviously didn't have my kit with me that night. It took a few minutes, but I used the hairpins to pop the latch and quietly lifted the trunk enough to squeeze through. Once inside, I pulled the lid mostly shut, making sure not to lock myself in. I didn't have to wait long. I heard two people leaving the building and approached the cars. There was some muffled chit-chat, then the driver's side door opened and shut. The engine roared to life, and in the trunk, I was jostled slightly as the vehicle accelerated. The radio came on. I hummed along until the car pulled to a stop a few minutes later. The driver exited. I waited. 30 seconds. 40 seconds. Then I slipped out and closed the trunk. I was on a quiet street in the West End, with clothes shops on one side and a 3-story apartment building on the other. Most of the windows were dark. I watched the building, and a minute later, a light came on in the windows of the right side apartment on the 2nd floor. So, now I knew where the agent lived. Good. Satisfied with how the evening went, especially considering that an hour before I was sure I would be spending the rest of my life in prison, I turned and headed home. I went to work the next morning, same as any other day. We had recently gotten a new batch of the Kodak Ekticum DT60s at the lab, and I was still having trouble getting the machines to work. I missed the old methods of blood analysis, but I guess you can't stop progress. I think I would have really excelled in the olden days, the Middle Ages, the age of leeches, back when people had a simpler understanding of the human body. Blood, yellow bile, black bile, phlegm. That sort of thinking might be archaic, but there's wisdom in it. All these discoveries in microbiology and genetic analysis, but beneath it all, when you distill the substance of our existence to its most basic, you find that the human animal is just a bag of blood, easily punctured, easily spilled. It turned out that day was Greg's birthday. Greg was the floor manager at DC Medical. He actually went around and told everyone in the lab that it was his birthday and that they should all sing to him at lunch. He had brought a cake from home. It had candles and his name on it and everything. That was so embarrassing that it made me want to kill myself. So I said that I was going out for lunch and left at noon. Before I left, I grabbed a Washington Post someone had left on their desk. I took the bus to DuPont Circle, then walked over to Church Street. I didn't visit that part of the city much. The men who came in search of late-night rendezvous in DuPont were known to favor boys over girls, so it wasn't one of my usual haunts. It was a nice neighborhood. Row houses with raised porches, little yards, American flags. The trees that lined the road rained down leaves of orange and gold as I walked. I crunched the leaves under my shoes, smiling at the sound. When I got to the number 1773, I saw the black Bentley parked out front. I crossed the street and leaned against a street lamp, pretending to read the paper. It was 12:27. So far, I was actually enjoying myself. This spy stuff was kind of fun. A couple of minutes later, the front door opened and the man himself came out, carrying a briefcase and checking his watch. He didn't look like anyone special to me. Sure, maybe he could build bombs and start wars and all that, but that sort of destruction was cheap. It was easy. It was cheating. As Arkady Morozova walked down the front steps, he turned and yelled over his shoulder, "Jonathan, it's time." Another staircase led down to an apartment beneath the house, and I watched as a man exited and jogged up into view. Morozova tossed the man a set of keys. This second man, Jonathan, looked to be in his early 20s. He had a handsome face, broad shoulders, black hair slicked back. He wore an overcoat over a suit and tie. I kept the newspaper held up to hide most of my face, but I don't think they noticed me anyway. They were in a hurry. Jonathan opened the back door of the Bentley for Morozova, then climbed in the front seat. As the car sped away, I lowered the paper. So, Arkady Morozova had an American bodyguard who lived downstairs and drove him around. That would complicate things, but I could make it work. Agent Walsh had said Morozova frequently picked up women on 14th Street. Did he have the driver in the car with him then? I didn't like the idea of doing it there anyway. Too many witnesses. Church Street would be better. I had never done two at once. That could get tricky. I figured I might have to get creative. I walked back to the bus stop, wondering if there would be any cake left over at the office. I got ready at midnight. It's a pretty simple process for me. I pick out an outfit, do my makeup, and listen to music to get into the mood. I don't have an elaborate kit to pack. I don't know why other killers bother to use sophisticated and cumbersome weapons. Bowie knives, hacksaws, axes. Don't they know that the perfect tool for slicing human flesh is the humble scalpel? I use a size 40, double edge with a curved blade, on a sturdy but lightweight handle of surgical steel. That's always been my weapon of choice. I keep one in the lining of my overcoat. That night, I dressed more conservative than usual, donning a black bob wig, dark stockings, and a black dress. No heels, in case I needed to run. And I brought along my lockpicks, just in case, tucked into the inside pocket of my coat. It's a great coat. Not only stylish and practical, with lots of pockets big and small, but patterned with red camouflage in 3 shades: crimson, carmine, and burgundy. I've never found a fabric half as good at hiding bloodstains. I got to Church Street at 4:45 a.m. It was mostly quiet, except for a distant siren and a breeze that shook the American flags. It was hard to guess how long each step of my plan would take, so I thought it best to begin right away. Moving swiftly and quietly, I descended the stairs to the lower apartment. As I stood outside the door, I ruffled my wig and composed my face into a mask of drunken confusion and fear. Clearing my throat, I began to pound on the door. I knocked loud enough to evoke a sense of panic, but not so loud as to wake the neighbors, or Morozova upstairs.
"Please,"
I sobbed, a strangled, desperate sound.
"Can you just... I need help. I don't know where else to go."
I heard someone moving inside and a light came on. I blinked, and the tears that had already formed in my eyes trickled onto my cheeks. I'm good at fake crying. I'm good at acting in general. It's probably the third most important attribute in accomplishing this sort of thing, following nerves of steel and a detailed knowledge of the human anatomy. The door opened a few inches. The young man Jonathan looked out sleepily.
"What are you saying?"
he asked, squinting in the light of the street lamps.
"I got mugged,"
I said, stuttering and slurring my words.
"By the park. They took my purse. I don't know what to do."
He blinked, scratching his cheek, and muttered something about the time.
"What if they come back?"
I asked desperately, clutching at my neck where a stolen necklace might have been.
Yeah, come in, I guess."
He opened the door fully, yawning.
"I'll call the police for you."
I took one step inside, swooned, and pretended to stumble into the coat rack.
"Whoa, watch yourself,"
he said, grabbing my arms to steady me.
"Thanks,"
I stammered. I looked up at him in the dim light and battered my teary eyelashes like some Hollywood starlet. He became very awake, very quickly when I did that. I could practically hear the blood rushing to his penis.
"Do you, want a glass of water, maybe?"
he asked, closing the front door and flattening his bed head with a hand.
"Sure, thanks,"
I said breathily. He smiled and walked into the kitchen. I rolled my eyes and followed him. Big, dumb sheep. In 5 minutes, he had forgotten all about calling the police. He had a hand on my knee as I sat on a stool in his kitchen.
"So,"
I said, tensing my cheeks so that they flushed.
"How am I ever going to repay you?"
He chuckled.
"Jesus, you're forward, aren't you?"
I shrugged. His face fell a little.
Actually, I have to get dressed soon. I have work in 30 minutes. But if you give me your number, what I had in mind doesn't take 30 minutes, I said,
now laying my own hand on his leg. I slid my fingers up and around the thigh. It was so tempting to pull my scalpel out. The femoral artery was right there, waiting, begging to be slashed, to be opened, to spill a great slippery puddle's worth of blood onto the kitchen floor. He let out a little groan and bit his lip. I bet he thought that looked cute. It looked so stupid. I grinned.
So tell me, what are you into? What do you mean?
He chuckled. I leaned closer.
Everybody's into something. What's your thing?
He blushed, let go of my knee, and leaned back on his stool.
Actually, it's kind of weird. I'm kind of weird.
His eyes went cold and hungry, the pupils dilating.
I like to be tied up.
I almost laughed.
That's perfect,
I said, and I meant it. When I surveyed my handiwork afterward, I felt a mix of emotions. There was some pride. I had done a really good job, if I may say so myself. Not just with the killing itself. That had been so easy it felt like cheating. What else do you call it when the victim brings out a rope and begs you to tie it around his neck and pull? The way I arranged the corpse, sitting forward in the bed with the rope running from his neck to the headboard, his hand on his thing, a Hustler magazine on the sheets beside him, it looked just right, almost beautiful, in the violent glimmer of the coming dawn glowing from the high windows, like a Renaissance painting, Michelangelo's autoerotic asphyxiation mishap. But even as I admired the scene, I felt a certain pang of ickiness. That's the word. It felt off, and I realized why. There was no blood. There needed to be blood. There needed to be a mess. Because life is messy, so death should be messy too. That made sense. I checked the time. Morozova would be coming out any minute. I hurriedly wiped down any fingerprints and left through the front door, rushing up the stairs and over to the sidewalk in front of the neighbor's garden. I waited as the eastern sky glowed a deep orange. I was running out of time. The door of 1773 opened. I heard Morozova cough and spit as he walked down the stairs.
Jonathan, it's time.
I held my breath, waiting.
Jonathan.
I heard him walk down the stairs and knock on Jonathan's door. Then he grunted something in Russian, and I heard him jingling his car keys. He came back up the stairs and approached the car, muttering to himself. I started to walk along the sidewalk toward him, casually, confidently. He noticed me, but only cast me a quick glance before looking down at the keys in his hand, walked around the car, climbed into the front seat, and opened the passenger door and slid inside in one fluid movement. He looked over at me, and his body twitched in surprise.
What do you think the FBI wants you dead?
I said. There was a heavy pause.
The FBI.
I nodded. He swallowed loudly.
You are agent.
That made me smile.
Do I look like an FBI agent? No, I don't know.
He hesitated. It was still dim in the car, but there was a bit of light reflecting in his eyes behind his glasses. I saw the eyes dart to look out the windshield, then at me, then at his own car door. He exhaled.
If you are not agent, what are you doing here?
I relaxed, slumping sideways into the passenger seat, placing an elbow on the armrest and putting my chin in my hand.
I'm not sure, to be honest. I'm trying to figure that out. This whole thing, it's new for me. Not let's just say that you fit the bill perfectly for who I usually, I think it's the obligation part of it that's throwing me off. It makes it feel like homework. Do you know what I mean?
He shook his head.
I'll tuck you in,
I said.
when it's done. Get out,
He said, voice trembling.
now.
He leaned and reached over me to the passenger door handle. I snatched his wrist with my left hand, and yanking back the sleeve of his suit coat to expose his wrist, I brought the scalpel down with my right hand. The slash was clean. It went deep, severing the radial and ulnar arteries. Even as he gasped and jerked away, blood sprayed across the dashboard and dripped onto the seats. I breathed in through my nostrils, filling my sinuses with the fragrance of it. Copper and iron, a little tangy, a hint of sweetness. I opened my mouth, tasting the cold, bloody air on my tongue. He opened his mouth to scream, but a pitiful moan came out instead. I turned and threw myself onto him, pinning him backward with my knees, my left hand gripping the side of his face and pushing his head sideways into the headrest. His neck muscles strained, tight as cords under the pale skin. I inserted the blade beneath his right ear, and holding the head steady with my left hand, I sliced downward with even pressure, carving through the sternocleidomastoid muscle and severing the jugular and carotid arteries. Moving around the front of the neck, I dragged the scalpel through the tough cartilage of the trachea. I turned his head toward me as I brought my blade up across the left side of the neck and finished the cut. I collapsed back into the passenger seat, breathing hard. It had taken 3.5 seconds, a respectable time. Without the neck muscles to hold it up, Morozova's head tilted forward onto his chest. His breaths came in shallow wheezes, and his left hand continued to raise shakily in search of the door handle. He was still fighting. Impressive. The smell of blood was thick as smoke in the car now. Intoxicating. I swooned and closed my eyes. It hadn't felt like homework after all. It felt right. It felt fun. But when I opened my eyes again, I couldn't help but notice that the sun had risen. A soft golden light flooded the street. Somewhere close, a dog was barking. A boy on a bike would probably come by soon to deliver the post to every doorstep. Morozova was still twitching, blood pouring out of his neck in a pulsing stream.
I gotta speed this up,
I said. I shifted him and he hunched forward, forehead smooshing against the steering wheel. Rising on the seat, I struggled to remove his suit coat. Once it was finally off, I set it down, positioned the body back against the seat, and undid his belt. He was wearing swimming trunks under his slacks. I had to lift and tussle him to get the pants and trunks to slide down his thighs, to his knees, then force them in a bunch around his ankles. I spread his legs, which were slick with warm blood, and felt with 2 fingers for the femoral artery. Heartbeat was already too weak to feel, so I used my scalpel to cut a long slash down the hole of the thigh. Now, he looked like one of mine. I grinned. Draping the suit coat backward over his torso, I tucked it around his shoulders and into the gash at his neck. I leaned to his ear and whispered, Spogoyachi something, damn it. I leaned back, shaking my head.
I learned how to say goodnight in Russian, but now I can't remember it. Damn. Oh well. Would have been cool though.
I opened the passenger door and climbed out. The morning was crisp, and the world smelled like fallen leaves. My hands were shaking as I stowed the scalpel in its place and began to walk down the sidewalk. I was filled with it now. The giddiness, the victory, the feeling of pure bliss, even if it was short-lived, like an orgasm. Sometimes it made me sleepy. That day, it made me yearn for more. I wasn't done yet, I realized. I needed another. Special Agent Jensen slept in. Sunlight was slicing through the blinds by the time she opened her eyes and looked sleepily around the bedroom. When her gaze reached me in the corner chair, I gave her a little wave. Good morning. Jensen gasped, sat up, and and started to lunge for her bedside table.
"Don't bother. I already took your gun,"
I told her.
"You're a heavy sleeper. That seems like a bad quality in an FBI agent."
She took in a shaky breath, one hand tightening around the sheets and pulling them up over her nightgown to the center of her chest.
"You look really pretty today,"
I said.
"I look like a total mess in the mornings. My eyes are all puffy. Do you use cream?" "What do you want?"
Jensen asked in a whisper. I sat forward in the chair, fingers tapping on the armrests.
"I've been thinking about all this. You said it was about balancing the scales, right? But then I thought about what I did this morning. If I killed this big-time Soviet dude, not to mention his bodyguard, surely that action, in and of itself, swings the scales too far in the opposite direction, right? So it's all topsy-turvy again."
She swallowed. I watched her body go through the motions, her mouth tightening, her neck contracting. I even heard the subtle movement of air and saliva in her throat. I stood up and took a step toward the bed.
"Which means, to make things right,"
I said,
"I need to counteract my previous action. I need to kill someone on the other side. On your side."
She stared up at me, big eyes on the verge of tears, big curls haloed in the radiant morning light.
"So how about this?"
I said, sliding my hands into my pockets.
"You and I go pay a visit to Special Agent Asshole and tuck him in. What do you say, sweetheart?"
Her brow furrowed, her lips trembled, and she squirmed in place on the bed. Then her gaze came into focus and locked on mine. She went very still. A devilish gleam came into her dark eyes as her lips curled into a smile. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to click subscribe and check out some more stories here.